At 8:34 a.m. Eastern Standard Time this morning, the White House released a statement announcing that President Trump had sent a formal trade proposal to Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney overnight in an attempt to prevent further escalation of the economic crisis. The proposal, according to the White House statement, offers significant concessions, including removal of 75% of tariffs on Canadian goods, restoration of intelligence sharing, and commitment to maintain NORAD operations. In exchange, the proposal requests that Canada suspend Phase 1 measures, agree to resume energy exports at previous levels, and commit to negotiating a new bilateral framework over the next 90 days. The White House characterized this as a generous compromise that addresses Canadian concerns while protecting American interests. The statement said, "The administration expects Canada to respond positively within 24 hours. Less than 4 hours later, at 12:17 p.m., Mark Carney held a press conference in Ottawa. He stood at the podium, held up a printed copy of Trump's proposal, and said 5 words that have now been replayed on every news network across the world. "This proposal is not serious." Carney then spent 6 minutes methodically dismantling every element of Trump's offer, explaining why it fails to meet Canada's 5 requirements, and making clear that Canada will not negotiate away from those requirements no matter what alternatives the United States proposes. The press conference ended with Carney announcing that Phase 1 measures will continue as scheduled, that Canada expects full compliance with all 5 demands by March 18th, and that any further US proposals that don't meet those demands will be rejected without consideration. Trump tried to regain control of the negotiation. Carney shut him down completely, and the world just watched Canada reject the United States and dictate the terms under which this crisis will be resolved. In this breakdown, I'm going to walk you through exactly what Trump's proposal offered and why the White House believed it represented meaningful concessions. I'm going to show you Carney's point-by-point rejection and why he characterized the proposal as not serious. I'm going to reveal the immediate White House reaction to being rejected so publicly and so definitively. I'm going to explain why Trump's attempt to negotiate around Canada's 5 demands backfired and strengthened Canada's position. And I'm going to give you 2 scenarios for what happens in the final 10 days before the March 18th deadline. Subscribe to join the community and share this video if it brought you value. Let me walk you through what Trump's proposal actually contained, because understanding what was offered and what was withheld reveals why Carney rejected it so decisively. According to the full text of the proposal, which was leaked to multiple media outlets within hours of Carney's rejection, Trump's offer had 7 main elements. First, removal of 75% of tariffs on Canadian goods. The proposal states that the United States would eliminate tariffs on most Canadian products, but would maintain 25% of the tariffs on specific sensitive sectors, including steel, aluminum, and dairy. The proposal does not specify which products would retain tariffs or provide a timeline for removing the remaining 25%. Second, restoration of Five Eyes intelligence sharing. The proposal commits to resuming full intelligence sharing through Five Eyes mechanisms and states that the United States values the security partnership with Canada. However, the commitment is conditioned on Canada demonstrating good faith by suspending economic measures against US banks and energy restrictions. Third, continuation of NORAD. The proposal states that the United States remains committed to NORAD and will work with Canada to modernize the joint defense system, but the commitment is described as subject to periodic review and includes language stating that NORAD operations depend on mutual cooperation and shared priorities. Fourth, no compensation for economic damage. The proposal makes no mention of the $14.7 billion in compensation Canada demanded for damages caused by illegal tariffs. The proposal states that both countries should move forward rather than dwelling on past disputes. Fifth, no formal recognition of Canadian resource sovereignty. The proposal acknowledges that Canada controls its natural resources, but requests that Canada commit to stable and predictable export policies that ensure US energy security. This is diplomatic language for demanding guaranteed supply at favorable terms. Sixth, no public retraction of sovereignty threats. The proposal does not include any statement from Trump retracting suggestions that Canadian provinces could or should join the United States. Instead, the proposal includes generic language about respecting Canada as a valued neighbor and partner. Seventh, Request for 90-day negotiating period. The proposal asks Canada to suspend all economic measures against the United States for 90 days, while both countries negotiate a comprehensive new framework for the bilateral relationship. During this period, Canada would resume full energy exports, lift financial restrictions on US banks, and commit to not implementing any new economic measures. The White House statement releasing the proposal characterized it as meeting Canada's core concerns. It argued that removing 75% of tariffs represents substantial movement, that committing to NORAD and intelligence sharing addresses security issues, and that offering a 90-day negotiating period shows American willingness to find long-term solutions. The statement said Canada should accept this proposal as a foundation for resolving the crisis. Subscribe right now, because what I'm about to show you is Carney's systematic destruction of Trump's proposal and why his rejection was so devastating to US credibility. At 12:17 p.m., Carney walked to the podium in Ottawa holding a printed copy of Trump's proposal. He said, "The United States sent Canada a proposal this morning. I want to address it directly because the Canadian people and the world deserve to understand why this proposal fails." Carney then went through each element. First, tariff removal. Canada's requirement is complete removal of all tariffs unconditionally and immediately. The US proposal offers to remove 75% of tariffs, while maintaining 25% on unspecified sensitive sectors. This is not compliance. This is the United States claiming the right to maintain illegal tariffs on products it chooses. Canada will not accept partial compliance with our first requirement. Carney paused and looked directly into the camera. Second, NORAD and intelligence sharing. Canada's requirement is a formal, legally binding commitment signed by the President and senior officials that guarantees continuation of defense and intelligence cooperation. The US proposal offers vague commitments subject to review and conditioned on Canada's behavior. This is not a guarantee. This is the United States reserving the right to threaten NORAD again in the future if Canada does anything Washington dislikes. Canada will not accept conditional security guarantees. Third, sovereignty retraction. Canada's requirement is that President Trump issue a public statement retracting any suggestion that Canadian territory could become part of the United States. The US proposal contains no such retraction. It includes generic language about partnership, but does not address the fundamental violation of suggesting that Canadian provinces are available for American annexation. This requirement is non-negotiable. The United States must explicitly retract sovereignty threats, or there is no path forward. Carney's tone remained calm, but his words were precise and damning. Fourth, compensation. Canada calculated $14.7 billion in economic damage caused by illegal US tariffs. The US proposal ignores this entirely and suggests we move forward without addressing past harm. Canada will not move forward while the United States refuses to acknowledge or compensate for damages it caused. This requirement stands. Fifth, resource sovereignty. Canada's requirement is formal US recognition that Canadian natural resources are controlled by Canada and sold on terms Canada determines. The US proposal requests that Canada commit to stable and predictable export policies that ensure US energy security. That is not recognition of sovereignty. That is a demand for guaranteed supply. Canada will not trade explicit sovereignty for vague American requests. Carney then addressed the 90-day negotiating period request. The United States asks Canada to suspend all economic measures for 90 days while we negotiate a new framework. In other words, the United States wants Canada to give up all leverage, resume full energy exports, lift all financial restrictions, and trust that America will negotiate in good faith over the next 3 months. Canada tried trusting American good faith. That trust was violated when President Trump imposed illegal tariffs, questioned our sovereignty, and threatened to dismantle NORAD. Canada will not make that mistake again. Carney closed with the most definitive statement of the entire press conference. Canada's 5 requirements are clear, specific, and non-negotiable. The United States has 10 days to meet those requirements. Any proposal that does not fully satisfy all 5 requirements will be rejected. This proposal does not satisfy any of the 5 requirements. Therefore, it is rejected. Phase 1, measures, continue. The March 18th deadline stands. Canada expects full compliance. Carney placed the proposal on the podium and walked away. No questions. The message was unmistakable. Canada is not negotiating. Canada has stated its terms. The United States either accepts those terms completely or faces Phase 2 implementation. The market reaction was immediate and told the story of how investors view the balance of power. Within 30 minutes of Carney's press conference, US stocks fell sharply as traders realized Trump's negotiation attempt had failed completely. The S&P 500 dropped 2.1%. Energy stocks fell harder as traders priced in the likelihood that Canadian energy cuts continue and possibly expand. Meanwhile, Canadian stocks and the Canadian dollar strengthened as traders recognized that Canada is winning this confrontation and that international support for Canada is solid. Currency markets showed the Canadian dollar gaining another 1.3% against the US dollar. Every market indicator points to the same conclusion. Canada has leverage. The United States does not. And Trump's attempt to negotiate from strength was exposed as negotiating from weakness. Here's what happened in Washington when Carney rejected Trump's proposal. At 12:45 p.m., the National Security Advisor called an emergency meeting. According to sources, officials discussed whether to make another proposal or whether attempting further negotiation would only result in additional public humiliation. The consensus was that Carney has made clear he will not negotiate away from the 5 requirements and that any US proposal that doesn't meet all 5 will be rejected immediately and publicly. At 1:30 p.m., Trump was briefed on Carney's rejection. According to sources, Trump was furious and felt personally disrespected. He reportedly said Carney was making a huge mistake and that Canada would pay a price for rejecting American attempts at compromise. Advisors attempted to explain that the proposal didn't actually meet Canada's requirements and that Carney's rejection was predictable. Trump reportedly insisted that removing 75% of tariffs was a major concession and that Canada should have accepted it. Advisors explained that partial compliance with Canada's demands is still non-compliance and that Canada has no reason to accept anything less than full compliance given Canada's strong position. At 3:00 p.m., the White House issued a statement. The statement said, "Canada's rejection of a generous American proposal demonstrates that Prime Minister Carney is not interested in resolving this crisis diplomatically. The United States made significant concessions and offered a clear path forward. Canada's refusal to engage constructively shows that Canada prefers confrontation to cooperation. The responsibility for any further economic damage lies entirely with the Canadian government." The statement attempts to blame Canada for the crisis continuation, but it ignores the fundamental issue. Trump's proposal didn't meet Canada's stated requirements, so Canada had no reason to accept it. At 4:15 p.m., congressional leaders released a joint statement. The statement said, "The President's proposal did not meet Canada's 5 requirements. Prime Minister Carney was correct to reject it. We call on the President to stop wasting time with insufficient proposals and to simply accept Canada's terms before March 18th. Every day of delay causes more economic damage to the American people. Let me explain why Trump's negotiation attempt backfired and actually strengthened Canada's position. By offering a proposal that didn't meet Canada's requirements and having that proposal publicly rejected, Trump demonstrated several things to international observers. First, the United States is desperate enough to make offers, which signals weakness. Second, the United States is still trying to negotiate partial compliance rather than full compliance, which signals that Trump doesn't understand or doesn't accept that Canada has leverage. Third, Canada is confident enough to reject US proposals publicly and definitively, which signals strength and international support. The rejected proposal makes Trump look weak and Carney look strong. If Trump had simply remained silent and worked toward meeting Canada's 5 requirements, he could have avoided this public defeat. By making an insufficient proposal and having it rejected, Trump gave Carney another opportunity to demonstrate Canadian resolve on the world stage. Let me give you 2 scenarios for the final 10 days. Scenario 1, emergency capitulation. Trump facing continued economic damage, market decline, congressional pressure, and international isolation, finally accepts that he has no choice. By March 15th, 5 days before the deadline, the White House announces that the United States will meet all 5 of Canada's requirements. Tariffs are completely removed. A formal NORAD commitment is signed. Trump issues a public statement retracting sovereignty threats. Compensation of $14.7 billion is agreed to and structured as trade credits. Canadian resource sovereignty is formally recognized. Canada immediately suspends Phase 1 measures. Phase 2 is never implemented. The crisis ends, but American credibility is permanently damaged. The world has watched the United States forced to surrender to a smaller neighbor. Scenario 2. Deadline passes without compliance. Trump continues to believe Canada will back down. He makes no further proposals and takes no action to meet Canada's 5 requirements. Minor advisors desperately try to convince him to act, but Trump refuses. March 18th arrives at 5 p.m. with no U.S. compliance. Carney holds a press conference at 5:15 p.m. announcing Phase 2 implementation. All Canadian energy exports to the United States cease at midnight. Canada formally withdraws from USMCA effective in 30 days. NORAD is dissolved. U.S. bank operations in Canada are suspended. The 40-nation coalition implements coordinated support measures for Canada and coordinated diplomatic isolation of the United States. Within 1 week, the U.S. economy is in crisis. Gas prices double. Rolling blackouts affect 15 states. Financial markets enter freefall. Congress moves to override Trump's authority or remove him from office. The United States faces the worst self-inflicted crisis in its history. I'm watching whether Trump makes any public statement in the next 48 hours, whether any major corporations or state governors publicly call for accepting Canada's terms, and whether congressional Republicans begin formal discussions about legislative action to force compliance. Trump tried to negotiate. Carney rejected him. 10 days remain and Trump still has made no move toward actual compliance. The March 18th deadline is coming. Canada is ready. The United States is